Ancient civilization that disappeared mysteriously. The silent cities. The streets were empty. Not ruined. Not broken. Just empty. Brick walls stood beneath the sun, laid with care and precision. Roads stretched forward in straight lines, wide enough for carts and crowds that would never return. No voices echoed between the buildings. No smoke rose from cooking fires. No doors opened. This was not the aftermath of war. This was something stranger. A city built for life, abandoned without a trace of panic. Thousands of homes remained intact. Public baths still stood. Drain systems ran beneath the streets as if waiting to be used again. Yet every person was gone, and history had no answer why. A civilization before empires, long before Rome expanded across Europe, before Greek philosophers debated in marble halls, before Egypt reached the height of its power. Another civilization was already thriving. It rose quietly along the Indus River. It did not carve giant statues of rulers. It did not leave stories of conquest on stone walls. It did not celebrate kings or armies. Instead, it built cities, advanced ones, and for centuries, it flourished, largely unnoticed by history, until it vanished. The discovery that shocked the world. In the early 20th century, workers in what is now Pakistan were building railway lines. They needed bricks. They found them underground. At first, no one thought much of it. Old ruins were common in the region. But as digging continued, patterns emerged. Walls appeared. Streets followed. Buildings formed shapes too deliberate to ignore. Archaeologists were called. What they uncovered changed everything. An ancient city, vast, planned, and silent. Mohenjo-daro. Soon after, another city was discovered. Harappa. Then another. And another. Dozens of cities, stretching across hundreds of miles. All from the same civilization. All abandoned. Cities built with intelligence. These were not accidental settlements. They were engineered. Streets crossed at right angles. Neighborhoods followed consistent layouts. Homes were built with standardized bricks. Many houses had private bathrooms. Waste flowed through covered drainage systems beneath the streets. Clean water entered homes through carefully designed channels. This level of urban planning would not be matched again for thousands of years. And yet, this civilization left no obvious rulers behind. The mystery of missing kings. Archaeologists searched for palaces. They found none. They searched for royal tombs. None. They searched for statues of kings, emperors, or conquerors. Nothing. Instead, cities appeared balanced. Homes were similar in size. Public spaces were shared. No building dominated the skyline. It was as if authority existed, but without spectacle. A society organized around order, not power. And that made its disappearance even more puzzling. Life along the Indus. The Indus River sustained everything. Its floods were predictable and gentle, renewing the soil each year. Farmers grew wheat and barley. Craftspeople worked stone, metal, and clay. Merchants traded goods across long distances. Indus seals have been found in Mesopotamia, hundreds of miles away. This was a connected world. Stable. Productive. Enduring. For centuries. So what broke the balance? A collapse without chaos. When civilizations fall, history usually leaves scars. Burned cities. Broken weapons. Mass graves. But here, there were none. Buildings were not destroyed. Streets were not filled with rubble. Homes were not looted or burned. People left behind tools, pottery, personal belongings. They did not flee in terror. They did not fight to the end. They walked away. And history does not often record why people leave power behind willingly. Small signs of decline. As excavations continued, subtle changes appeared. Later buildings were less precise. Bricks were uneven. Drainage systems showed poor maintenance. This was not a sudden collapse. It was gradual. Something was weakening the civilization from within. Slowly, quietly, like an illness spreading unnoticed. The river shifts. One leading explanation focuses on nature. Rivers move. The Indus may have changed its course. Some areas may have flooded too often. Others may have dried out. Without water, crops fail. Without crops, cities cannot survive. Evidence suggests that water sources moved away from some major cities. Life became harder. But was that enough to end an entire civilization? Climate and uncertainty. Climate patterns were changing across the region. Rain became less predictable. Dry seasons grew longer. Farming demanded more effort with fewer results. Trade weakened. Food security faded. A society built on balance was losing the conditions that made balance possible. No records, no voices. What makes this civilization especially haunting is its silence. The Indus people left writing behind, symbols carved into seals and pottery. But their script has never been deciphered. No chronicles, no histories, no explanations. Their voices are locked behind a code humanity cannot yet read. History hears nothing but a different kind of Yendi. Some scholars believe the people did not disappear. They adapted. They slowly moved eastward. Cities shrank. Villages formed elsewhere. Life changed shape. Power faded quietly. No collapse. No disaster. Just a choice. A civilization stepping away from urban life rather than fighting to preserve it. The questions that remain, if they chose to leave, why didn't they return? Why did their writing vanish? Why did no successor rise from their cities? Why did their knowledge not spread? Something more than people was lost. A way of life. A philosophy of order without dominance. The seal that cannot speak. Among the ruins, archaeologists found a seal, different from the others. Its symbols were unfamiliar. Its markings seemed deliberate, perhaps even cautionary. If it could be read, it might explain everything. Why they left, what they feared, what they understood about survival. But the code remains unbroken. The final question, the Indus civilization did not fall in flames. It did not collapse in violence. It faded, and that may be the most unsettling mystery of all. Did it fail? Or did it understand something the world has since forgotten? That sometimes survival does not mean fighting to the end, but knowing when to walk away. An empty world that makes sense. The cities of the Indus civilization were empty, but they were not confusing. Archaeologists who returned to these ruins over many decades noticed something that did not match the usual pattern of collapse. Nothing here looked rushed. Nothing looked accidental. The layout of the streets still followed clear logic. Homes were aligned carefully. Public spaces remained open and usable, even near the end of occupation. This was not the aftermath of panic. This was the result of intention. Most abandoned cities tell stories of fear. People flee without looking back. Objects are dropped mid-task. Buildings are damaged. Streets are filled with debris. But in the Indus cities, order remained, even after people were gone. That detail alone changed how historians began to think about what happened here. Because chaos leaves fingerprints. And this place showed restraint, the unusual calm of abandonment. When researchers examined homes, they found doors that had once been shut, not forced open. Rooms were still intact. Walls had not been broken through. Drainage systems, one of the most advanced features of Indus cities, were still in place. Some even showed signs of maintenance close to the final phase of occupation. Public baths were not destroyed. Wells were not poisoned. Storage areas were not burned. This matters. In times of invasion or sudden disaster, infrastructure is usually damaged first, either intentionally or through neglect. Here, it remained functional. The evidence suggests that people did not flee suddenly. They did not abandon their cities in a single dramatic moment. Instead, they left slowly, step by step. What people carry when they have time. One of the clearest clues comes from what was missing. Portable items, tools, small valuables, personal belongings were often gone. Heavy objects remained. Large storage jars stayed in place. Brick furniture was left behind. Entire buildings were untouched. This pattern tells archaeologists something very specific. People believed they would not need these cities again. They packed what they could carry easily and left what was tied to place. This is not how people behave when escaping danger. It is how people behave when relocating their lives. A civilization that did not prepare for war. Weapons are rare in Indus archaeological sites. Very rare. There is little evidence of large-scale warfare. No stockpiles of arms. No fortifications designed for long sieges. No mass graves linked to violent conflict. Walls did exist, but they appear to have been for flood control or boundary definition, not military defense. This civilization did not organize itself around conquest. Its energy went into sanitation, planning, trade, and standardization. That choice shaped everything. It also limited how the society could respond when conditions changed. Because not every threat can be fought. Writing that keeps its secrets. Thousands of small seals have been found across Indus sites. Each carries symbols, short sequences, repeated patterns, images of animals, and abstract signs. But no long texts. No histories, no laws, no royal decrees. The writing system remains undeciphered. Without readable records, historians are left with silence. We can measure their bricks, trace their streets, study their tools, but we cannot hear their explanations. The people of the Indus left behind one of the world's earliest writing systems, and also one of the quietest. Cities that slowly shrink. Archaeological layers show a gradual change. Large public buildings stopped being repaired. Construction became simpler. Materials were reused instead of replaced. Homes became smaller. Craftsmanship declined, not suddenly, but steadily. This is not what collapse looks like. This is what withdrawal looks like. People were stepping away from complexity, stepping away from urban life, reducing risk. When the river changed. Scientific studies of soil, sediment, and riverbeds reveal an unstable environment. Some areas show signs of repeated flooding. Others show long periods of dryness. Rivers that once flowed near cities shifted course. When water moves, everything moves with it. Farming becomes unreliable. Food storage becomes uncertain. Trade routes weaken. For a civilization built on predictability, this was a serious challenge. A society built on balance, not control. The Indus civilization relied on cooperation. There is little evidence of centralized rulers who could force people to stay, rebuild, or fight. Order came from shared systems, not authority. That worked well when the land was stable. But when the environment changed, cooperation alone may not have been enough. Without rulers to impose solutions, people chose adaptation instead. Life moves east. As major cities emptied, smaller settlements appeared farther east. They were simpler, more flexible, easier to sustain. This suggests migration, not extinction. People changed how they lived instead of trying to preserve what no longer worked. In doing so, they survived. But survival came at a cost. Why the cities stayed empty? Many civilizations rebuild after hardship. The Indus people did not. Once cities were abandoned, they remained so for centuries. Why return to a system that had already failed? Why rebuild complexity when simplicity worked better? The choice not to return may have been deliberate, a rare ending in human history. Most civilizations end through force. This one may have ended through decision. Not one leader's choice, not one dramatic moment, but thousands of small choices made over generations. To leave, to adapt, to let go. Knowledge that faded with the cities. One question remains deeply unsettling. If this civilization was so advanced, why did its knowledge not spread more clearly into later cultures? Why did its writing disappear? Why did its name vanish from memory? Perhaps because its people did not preserve power structures. They preserved life instead. A seal far from home. In a distant settlement, archaeologists found something unexpected. An Indus seal, carried far from the great cities. Kept, remembered. This suggests continuity. The people did not vanish. They blended into history. Quietly. The question that remains. If the Indus people survived, where did they go? What traditions did they carry forward? What knowledge was lost? And what was deliberately left behind? Because the evidence suggests something rare, they did not lose control. They chose to release it. And that decision may be their most powerful legacy. The mystery of forgotten cities. The greatest mystery of the Indus civilization is no longer how it ended. It is why it was forgotten. For thousands of years, massive cities lay hidden beneath soil and river sediment. Rivers changed course above them. New communities formed nearby. Entire empires rose, expanded, and disappeared. Yet no memory of the Indus people survived. No legends told by elders. No songs passed through generations. No written traditions that hinted at what once stood there. This absence is unusual. Civilizations usually leave echoes, stories, myths, warnings, or borrowed ideas. Here, there was only silence. And that silence forces historians to ask a deeper question. Was this civilization forgotten by accident? Or did it leave history on purpose? A civilization that did not seek immortality. Most ancient societies worked hard to be remembered. They carved their victories into stone. They built monuments meant to outlast time. They filled walls with stories of power and triumph. The Indus civilization did none of this. Its cities were advanced, but restrained. Its art was detailed, but modest. Its seals were personal, not monumental. There were no giant statues demanding admiration. No carvings declaring eternal glory. This was not a culture focused on legacy. And that choice shaped how history treated it. The absence of heroes and kings. Archaeologists searched for faces. They expected to find rulers, leaders, heroes, someone whose image represented authority. They found almost none. One small statue, often called the priest king, shows a calm figure seated quietly. No crown, no weapon, no exaggerated symbols of dominance. Just composure. This absence matters. Civilizations remembered by history are often remembered through individuals. The Indus people did not center their world around individuals. They built systems instead. And systems, when abandoned, leave fewer stories behind. Shared power, fading memory. Power in the Indus world appears to have been distributed. Cities followed similar layouts. Homes were relatively equal in size. Public infrastructure mattered more than palaces. There is little evidence of a ruling class that demanded attention or recognition. This made the society stable, but historically fragile, because history remembers names. And the Indus civilization left none behind. The slow departure from urban life. As environmental conditions changed, people did not resist. They adapted. Families moved first. Craftspeople followed. Trade networks slowly weakened. Cities did not collapse overnight. They emptied gradually. Markets became quieter. Public spaces lost their purpose. Urban life slowly dissolved. And yet, life itself continued, just elsewhere. Living beyond the cities, outside major urban centers, people adopted new ways of living. Smaller settlements, seasonal movement, local farming instead of long-distance trade. This life left fewer traces for archaeologists to find. No massive buildings, no permanent monuments. When later cultures arrived, they saw land, not ruins. And so, the memory of what came before never took root. The sudden end of writing, the Indus script vanished entirely. It was not borrowed by later cultures. It did not evolve. It did not survive. This is rare in human history. Most writing systems transform over time. But the Indus script was closely tied to city life, used for trade, organization, and seals. When cities disappeared, writing lost its function. And without use, it faded away. Knowledge that had no future. The Indus people understood city planning. They mastered water control. They built flood-resistant infrastructure. Yet later societies in the region did not use the same techniques. Not because the knowledge was useless, but because the conditions that required it no longer existed. Knowledge tied to a specific way of life often disappears when that life ends. Survival over remembrance. The Indus people did not rebuild their great cities. They did not teach future generations to honor a lost golden age. They did not preserve ruins as symbols. They focused on survival, adaptation, mobility, flexibility. This decision likely saved lives, but it erased their place in history. Understanding the fear beneath the choice. There is no evidence of a single catastrophic event. Instead, there is evidence of a pattern. Unpredictable rivers, changing climate, unstable seasons. Over time, the land stopped behaving as it once had. The Indus people recognized this early. They understood that cities depend on promises of water, of stability, of predictability. And those promises were breaking. While later cultures never spoke of them, new civilizations rose in nearby regions. They built kingdoms. They wrote texts. They claimed the land. They saw no towering ruins, no obvious warnings. So they believed they were first. History accepted that belief. The Indus civilization was not conquered. It was overwritten. An archaeological surprise. Modern researchers expected to find signs of conflict. They found none. They expected evidence of sudden disaster. They found preparation. They expected panic. They found patience. This forced historians to rethink what collapse means. A civilization that left no message. Most ancient societies leave warnings behind. Do not repeat our mistakes. Do not forget our fall. The Indus civilization left no such message. Only silence. And in that silence, humanity repeated the same patterns again and again. Footprints in the mud. In some of the oldest layers, archaeologists found footprints. Small ones. Children's footprints. Preserved in dried mud. They show steady movement. Not running. Not chaos. Families leaving together. Calmly. The question that remains. If a civilization can disappear without violence. If it can dissolve instead of collapse. If survival means becoming invisible, Then how many others have vanished the same way, without leaving a trace? The Indus civilization may not be history's greatest mystery. It may be its earliest warning. And only now are we beginning to listen. When the mystery turns toward us, at first, the ruins raised questions about the past. Broken streets, empty homes, silent cities. But as research continued, the focus began to shift. The mystery was no longer only about what happened to the Indus civilization. It was about what their story revealed about human societies, past and present. Because evidence increasingly suggested that this was not a weak or unprepared people. They were observant, organized, highly skilled, and their disappearance may not have been a failure at all. It may have been a warning. A civilization that observed the earth carefully. Archaeological evidence shows that the Indus people paid close attention to their environment. Their cities were built with drainage systems designed for seasonal flooding. Their farming followed predictable river cycles. Their trade depended on stable weather patterns. For centuries, these systems worked. Rivers flooded gently. Soil remained fertile. Life followed a reliable rhythm. But slowly, that rhythm changed. And the Indus people noticed early signs of environmental stress. Layer by layer, the ground tells a story. Sediment deposits show repeated flooding in some areas. Elsewhere, signs of drought appear. Fields produced less food. Trade networks weakened. Some settlements struggled to maintain infrastructure. At first, these changes were manageable. Small adjustments, minor adaptations. But over time, the changes became harder to ignore. The land was no longer behaving as it once had. When predictability disappears, civilizations depend on trust. Trust that the seasons will return. Trust that rivers will behave as expected. Trust that tomorrow will resemble yesterday. For the Indus people, that trust began to break. Scientific studies suggest that river systems shifted. Monsoon patterns changed. Floods became unpredictable, sometimes too strong, sometimes absent. The stable balance that supported large cities was gone. And without balance, urban life became risky, a different response to environmental crisis. History shows many societies attempting to control nature. They built massive barriers. They forced rivers into channels. They demanded more production from exhausted land. The Indus civilization appears to have chosen a different path. Instead of forcing the environment to obey, they adapted to it. Cities grew smaller. Infrastructure became simpler. Communities relocated to safer areas. This was not retreat. It was adjustment. The choice between power and survival. Every complex society eventually faces a difficult decision. Preserve power at all costs, or protect human life by changing course. Most civilizations choose to preserve power. The Indus civilization appears to have chosen survival. By reducing complexity, they reduced risk. By leaving cities, they avoided disaster. The cost was enormous. Their civilization faded. But their people endured. A collapse without drama. There is no evidence of a final crisis. No burning capitals. No mass destruction. No sudden end. Instead, archaeology suggests a gradual process. Families moved. Settlements shifted. Urban centers slowly emptied. This kind of ending leaves little behind. And history rarely remembers quiet choices. The fragility of highly efficient systems. Ironically, the Indus civilization may have been too successful. Its systems were efficient. Its cities were optimized. Its society relied on environmental stability. When stability disappeared, flexibility was limited. Modern researchers call this a known risk in complex systems. Efficiency can reduce resilience. And resilience is what allows societies to survive change. Knowledge that was never written as a warning. The Indus people understood limits. They understood that growth cannot continue forever, that cities depend on fragile conditions, that the environment sets boundaries no society can ignore. But they left no written warning, no carved lessons, no instructions for future generations. Their knowledge was lived, not recorded. And when their way of life ended, that knowledge faded with it. History repeating the same pattern. Thousands of years later, other civilizations faced similar challenges. Environmental stress, overexpansion, dependence on complex systems. Many ignored the warning signs. And when collapse came, it came with violence, suffering, and loss. The Indus civilization avoided that fate, but its lesson was forgotten. Why this story matters today: the Indus civilization forces us to confront an uncomfortable reality. Progress is fragile. Cities are temporary. Complex systems can fail quietly. There may be no dramatic moment, no clear signal, only slow change. And survival often belongs not to the strongest, but to the most adaptable. A wisdom hidden in absence. The Indus people did not leave behind monuments demanding attention. They left something subtler, a pattern, a decision, a response to environmental reality. They showed that leaving can be intelligent, that reducing complexity can be wise, that survival sometimes means stepping back. How nature erased their tracks. After the cities were abandoned, nature continued its work. Rivers shifted again. Sediment buried streets. Mud filled empty homes. Over centuries, the land covered what remained. Later cultures settled nearby, but rarely on top of the ruins. The silence was preserved. A civilization that whispered instead of shouting. Most fallen empires leave loud warnings. Collapsed walls, burned cities, written regrets. The Indus civilization left a whisper, so quiet that it took thousands of years to hear it. And even now, many still overlook it. Standing in the ruins today, when archaeologists walk through these ancient streets, one idea returns again and again. This was not chaos. It was choice. A difficult choice. A careful choice. A human choice. And one that future societies, including our own, may one day face. A civilization that did not truly die. If the Indus people survived as individuals, if their descendants blended into later populations, then the civilization did not vanish. It dissolved, its lesson hidden inside everyday lives. Unrecorded, uncelebrated, waiting to be rediscovered. The question left behind. Perhaps the greatest mystery is not why the Indus civilization disappeared, but why we failed to learn from it. Because they did not fall by accident. They stepped aside, and history moved forward without understanding the cost. The mystery that was never in the ruins. When people first encounter the ruins of the Indus civilization, they search for answers in stone, in broken walls, in empty streets, in silent buildings. But the final mystery was never buried there. It was buried in behavior. Because when archaeologists stepped back, away from individual artifacts and excavation sites, something became clear. This civilization did not end in panic. It did not collapse in chaos. It did not vanish in fear. Its ending was deliberate, and that realization changed how historians understood everything that came before it. The last signs of life, the final occupation layers of Indus cities tell a quiet story. Homes show no signs of sudden abandonment. Tools are not scattered. Structures are not violently damaged. Streets remain orderly. Public spaces show continued use near the end. Living areas appear maintained rather than destroyed. This suggests something important. People were not fleeing an immediate disaster. They were not escaping an invading force. They were not reacting to sudden collapse. They believed they had time. And that belief reshapes how we understand their final years. A departure without panic. In many ancient civilizations, endings are dramatic. Fire, war, violence, destruction. Here, there is none of that. Instead, archaeological evidence suggests a gradual withdrawal. Buildings stop being repaired. Public works slowly fall out of use. Urban density decreases over time. This was not an evacuation. It was a slow goodbye. A change measured in generations. This transition did not happen in a single lifetime. It unfolded across generations. Children grew up in smaller communities. Large markets became less important. Long-distance trade gradually declined. Life became simpler, more local, more flexible. The Indus people were not reacting emotionally. They were responding strategically. Walking away from risk. Large cities offer opportunity, but they also concentrate danger. Floods, crop failure, infrastructure breakdown, disease. As environmental stability declined, urban living became increasingly risky. The Indus response appears to have been restraint. Rather than expanding defenses or forcing nature to comply, they reduced exposure. They chose mobility over monumentality, adaptation over permanence. This was not weakness. It was calculation. Why history forgot them? History is drawn to spectacle. It remembers conquerors. It records wars. It celebrates power. The Indus civilization left behind none of that. No legendary rulers. No epic battles. No monumental inscriptions demanding remembrance. Their story did not fit the narrative history prefers. And so it faded. A civilization that rejected empire. Unlike many contemporaries, the Indus people did not build empires. They did not expand aggressively. They did not dominate neighbors through force. They did not define success through conquest. Their society emphasized balance, consistency, shared systems. When those systems became unstable, they did not double down. They stepped back. That mindset is uncommon in human history. Disappearance as movement, not death. The people did not vanish. Archaeological and genetic evidence suggests population movement, not extinction. Communities shifted east and south. Settlement patterns changed. Cultural practices evolved. Elements of Indus life continued in new forms. The civilization ended. The people survived. This was not disappearance. It was transformation. The cities left untouched. One detail continues to puzzle researchers. Later cultures settled near former Indus cities, but rarely built directly on top of them. This is unusual. Ancient societies often reuse old foundations. They repurpose ruins. They build over the past. Here, there was restraint. Whether practical, cultural, or symbolic, the result was the same. The cities remained quiet. Understanding limits. Modern societies often assume growth must continue. Bigger cities, more systems, greater complexity. The Indus civilization appears to have held a different belief. That growth has limits. That complexity increases vulnerability. That systems optimized for stability struggle with change. They accepted those limits. And they adjusted accordingly. The warning we overlooked. When the Indus cities were rediscovered, attention focused on their achievements. Urban planning, sanitation, architecture. But the deeper lesson lay elsewhere. Not in how they built, but in why they stopped. That question was easy to ignore. And so it was. A reflection of the modern world. Today, many societies depend on complex, interconnected systems. Supply chains, urban infrastructure, environmental predictability. These systems function well until conditions change. The Indus civilization shows that collapse does not always announce itself. Sometimes, it arrives quietly. The most restrained decision in ancient history. Few civilizations have shown restraint at a collective level. Most cling to power. Most resist change. Most sacrifice people to preserve systems. The Indus civilization appears to have chosen differently. They did not deny reality. They did not escalate risk. They adapted. That decision required cooperation, trust, and foresight. Why this story was never celebrated. This story does not glorify conquest. It does not celebrate domination. It does not elevate rulers. It teaches humility. And humility rarely becomes legend. People over cities. The Indus people understood something simple. Cities are tools, not identities. When conditions changed, they did not sacrifice lives for infrastructure. They preserved people. That priority reshaped their future, even if it erased their past. The quiet survival of knowledge. No palaces endured. No kings were remembered. No empires remained. But practices survived. Farming traditions, settlement patterns, adaptation strategies. Passed quietly, without monuments, without authorship. Invisible but real. A civilization that refused tragedy. We often describe the Indus civilization as a disappearance. But that word misleads. They did not fail suddenly. They did not collapse violently. They withdrew. And in doing so, they avoided catastrophe. The question they left behind. What if the purpose of civilization is not permanence? What if success is not measured by how long something lasts, but by how well it protects human life? The Indus civilization invites us to reconsider what progress means. The lesson almost missed. This story does not warn us about the past. It warns us about the future. It shows what happens when societies recognize limits, and what happens when they ignore them. An ending that was a beginning. The cities fell silent, but the decision echoed forward. Through time, through culture, through survival itself. Still waiting to be understood. Final reflection. Some civilizations fall loudly. Others survive quietly. The Indus civilization chose the quieter path. And in doing so, it left behind one of history's most important lessons. Hidden not in ruins, but in restraint.